Hyrule Warriors Age of Calamity was an absolute technical disaster on the Switch 1. And now on the Switch 2, it runs great now. It doesn't look great, but it's playable. So after sweating it out on that over the past couple of weeks, I got a lot of comments about Hyrule Warriors Definitive Edition, a game that I never owned on the Switch 1, and last time I played it was on the 3DS, and if I complained about Age of Calamity on the Switch 1, then I could only imagine what my video would have been about Hyrule Warriors on the 3DS. Anyway, since Hyrule Warriors was originally a Wii U game, it should run and look great on the Switch 2. So I went out and picked up a physical copy, and I was genuinely amazed at what I played. So going into this, I always thought that Age of Calamity was a better game in and of itself. Yes, it ran like crap and it didn't look great, but the overall layout and how Zelda-y it is suited me down to the ground. I preferred the art style because it does replicate what Breath of the Wild did. I prefer the story because it gives me a glimpse into the background of Breath of the Wild. And in general, I just preferred the layout of the game being the world map of Breath of the Wild, and you can hover over things and oh, you open this shop and then you go do this mission and you get to fight all the Breath of the Wild monsters, and I just preferred it as a game. Because from what I remember of playing Hyrule Warriors on the Wii U and 3DS, it is a solid game. It's fun, it's a great Warriors game, you get to run around and kill hundreds upon hundreds of enemies, but it feels like a Warriors game with a Zelda skin over it, and if I'm being totally honest, I don't really like the art style that much. I like that Link is left-handed. I also like the blue scarf he wears, it kind of contrast with the green, but apart from that, it just kind of looks a bit bland. And I guess you could probably say that this was the most bland time for Zelda. While Skyward Sword has a way better art style than Twilight Princess, I think both of them games have the worst art style of any Zelda game out there. Obviously, if you go back to the N64, it looks like an N64 game, but I prefer the overall art style of Ocarina of Time and Majora's Mask and Wind Waker, and then later on with Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom. I just think they really solidly cemented what Zelda should look like. Another thing about Hyrule Warriors was the overall plot. It didn't really inspire much in me, and the new characters like Linkle, Sia, and the blue girl that I'm forgetting the name of right now, I don't know. They're not fun to play in-game, which is a massive problem for me. I'd much prefer playing all the other characters. But also they're just like, sort of characters. So going into Hyrule Warriors, I was more looking at it from a gameplay perspective. And straight away, jumping in, let's get the elephant out of the room. So, Age of Calamity ran like crap, looked like crap. Now on the Switch 2, it looks like crap, and it runs okay. It runs at a solid 30 FPS. It's acceptable. I'd much prefer it to be 60 FPS, but at the very least, it's acceptable. But the second you play Hyrule Warriors Definitive Edition on the Switch 2, you're like, oh my god, this is how the Warriors games should be played, because since it is a Wii U port running on a Switch 1, it means they have a higher enemy count on the screen. It also means that the game runs at 1080p, 60 FPS, locked, and there are no frame drops whatsoever. So when I was playing it on my 4K TV, yes, it's running at 1080p, but it still looks really crisp, really sharp. And I was like, yes, this is what we should expect from Age of Imprisonment. I have a feeling they will go with 4K and keep it at 30 FPS, but if they have a performance mode or something that is 1080 60, I would be over the moon, because this game looks fantastic. And then after playing it on my TV, recording footage, I hopped into bed that night, played it in handheld mode, and I was like, oh, this is very sharp, because I thought that Hyrule Warriors would have been the typical 1080p on docked mode and 720p in handheld. But no, this can run at 1080p in handheld mode. And I looked at it, I was like, wow, this is really sharp. I took to Google it, and yes, it runs at 1080 60 in handheld mode. I'm like, yes, this is absolutely perfect. And as I said, since this is a Wii U game that was ported to the Switch, it means that you can have a lot more enemies on screen. If you do a side-by-side comparison of Age of Calamity and Hyrule Warriors, you can see that there's just a lot more enemies on screen in Hyrule Warriors, and when you're doing a big attack and you're killing 25 enemies in one slash, it just adds to the chaos and it makes it a much better experience to play. And see, this is where I'm a bit torn on these Hyrule Warriors games on the Switch, because, as I said, I much prefer the layout of Age of Calamity, much prefer the story, much prefer the art style. I prefer almost everything about it, even the little things, like when the enemies go into the stunned state and you can then knock down that little pie chart. In Age of Calamity, when an enemy does something that will put them into that state, the pie chart thing pops up straight away and you can just start like wailing on them. But in Hyrule Warriors, the enemy will do their attack and then they will pause for a second and then you'll hear the bum noise and then the pie chart pops up. So there's this little moment in between where if you hit them, the pie chart won't pop up and then you have to just wait for them to loop through their attacks to do the attack that will put them in that state. And another thing that I prefer about Age of Calamity is that you have a lot more agency on what you can do and how you can stun the enemies or get a special attack off on them, because you can parry, first of all, which is way easier now that it's in 30 FPS. Or you can do a flurry rush, or you can use one of your powers to put them into that stun state if they're doing an attack that can be countered by it. But in Hyrule Warriors, and this actually happens a lot if you're fighting a big enemy, you will just kite them around and just wait and let them do one attack. Okay, they don't go into a stun state after that, that's fine. Then another attack, okay, they're still not going into their stun state. A third attack, no, they're still not going into a fourth attack. There we go. So a lot of these fights with the bigger enemies do eventually just end up in you just sitting there just waiting for them to attack, and it kind of ruins that whole, like, this is just complete chaos. I am smashing buttons, I'm killing loads of enemies. So that is probably the biggest issue that I have with Hyrule Warriors from a gameplay standpoint. And then another thing that annoys me is that the map is done on a grid system, and it just feels extremely clunky when you're moving your characters around the map, because a keep that you want them to get into, maybe only the top left corner of the keep is in the bottom right corner of one of the grids that you're on. It just feels extremely clunky, whereas in Age of Calamity you just have free movement of a cursor. It makes it so much smoother. But that means that I'm just extremely torn on which game I prefer and which one, if somebody came to me and said, oh Adam, what Hyrule Warriors game should I play on my Switch? Because Hyrule Warriors Definitive Edition is 1080-60, it has a lot more enemies on screen, and it gives you so much more chaos on the screen, which is great. And it's still a really fun game to play, but when it comes to sort of like the layout of the campaign, I don't really like it that much. And then the adventure mode is fun, but I can't really see myself playing too much of it, but it's cool that they have it. They also have a Majora's Mask map, which is just brilliant, and all the Majora's Mask music is playing in the background. That is my favorite Zelda game, so I love it. But then you're just hit with missions that feel very repetitive. The maps that you fight on kind of just all meld into one. They don't really have any distinct things about them. And then you're getting into the new characters that I just don't really care about. But then I'm like, but you can play it at 1080p 60 FPS and it's just so smooth. But then you get on to Age of Calamity, and I much prefer every single aspect of that game, from art style to combat style to the characters that you can play as, to the story, to the overall layout, how it's on the map. Everything about that game is better than Hyrule Warriors Definitive Edition, but it runs at a really low resolution, it looks really ugly, and it only runs at 30 FPS. It's still playable. I still had a great time playing it over the past couple of weeks. So I am genuinely torn right down the middle on what you want to do. If you want the better game that runs at an acceptable frame rate now, play Age of Calamity. If you want the game that is still really fun and you will have a great time with, and there's a lot of content, there's honestly too much content in the game, you'd probably put 700 hours into it and not see everything, which is just crazy. But if you want the slightly worse game with, I believe, a worse art style and a worse story and just poorer mission variety and layout, but it runs at 1080p 60, then go for that. I'm completely torn. They're both great games anyway, and I'm glad once again that now we have the Switch 2. We can play all of these amazing games, because let's be real, the Switch 2 doesn't have a killer app. Mario Kart World is great, but it's Mario Kart at the end of the day. I will enjoy it, I'll play some of it. I'm dipping in for a couple of races here or there, but it's not a game I'm going to dedicate myself to. So I'm having a great time going back to all of these games, and I will probably do a video on RPGs on the Switch, because the Switch 2 is an RPG powerhouse now. It's crazy. Gothic now runs at 60 FPS on the Switch 2. Cyberpunk runs amazingly. And then there are just so many other RPGs that you can play on the Switch 2 that now run at a really good frame rate and sometimes an improved resolution. So thank you very much for watching. Let me know what your favorite Warriors game is. Are you just I like Hyrule Warriors because it's Zelda? Or do you just like the Warriors games in general? Because I don't really know that many Warriors fans. I have Dynasty Warriors Origins. I have a physical copy that I still haven't put into my PlayStation that I need to play. And I've played a lot of these games on the PS2. I played Fire Emblem Warriors. I played a small bit of Dragon Quest Heroes. That's the name of that game, the Warriors version. And it is a great way to just give you these fun properties in a very playable format. And I like to see it, and I would love to see more of them. in other franchises that I love. If I'm being honest, Pokemon Warriors would be top notch. But anyway, thank you for watching. Don't forget to subscribe, and I'll see you all in the next video. Goodbye.